Hi, I'm Christopher, and welcome to the Cabin Boy Knits Woolcast. This episode is all about dyeing with lilacs. I love dyeing with lilacs. It's the first shrub of the season, and they smell great. And it really feels like spring to me when the lilacs come out. And one of the tricky parts, though, when I'm dyeing with lilacs is I have to figure out when is the best time to pick it. And for me, when I want to get the most color out of the flowers, I pick it at its peak. And that's not great when you want your garden to look fantastic, but I want my yarn to look great too, so I pick it at its peak. The other thing that I love about lilacs is I use the entire plant. I will use the flowers in one dye pot, and I'll use the leaves in another dye pot, and then I'll cut the bark, and I'll put the bark in a separate dye pot as well. And what I'll get is 3 distinct dye pots. The colors will be complementary to one another, but the colors are very distinct. And so I love it. It's great, and you wouldn't think that you could get 3 distinct colors out of one shrub. So if you want to check that out, stick around, and we'll get dyeing with lilacs. Hi, I'm back, and I've got the dye pots that I've let sit overnight. So I'm going to go through one at a time, just so I don't get confused when I'm explaining it to you. So the first one was the bark, and I chopped the bark pieces up into probably around 2 to 3 inches, but some of them varied in size. Some of them were thicker and whatnot. So, and I'll give you a look at that once I strain it. So what I want to do now is strain it, but I'm going to show you the color, because the color is quite something. So there it is. So basically what I did was I filled the pot up 50%. So half of the pot was filled with sticks and branches from the tree. And then I filled the rest up with water, and I let it boil for 2 hours, and then I turned it off and I let it sit overnight. And it's really important for this one, when you're doing bark, to let it sit overnight, because it really starts to take on the color. I would say it was a very light color last night before I went to bed, and it's got a nice rich color now. So definitely let this one sit overnight. So what I'm going to do is strain this one. So just to make it a little easier for me, I'm going to take a few mason jars out. And when the pot's really hot, I use my mitts. But this isn't too bad right now. So pretty much it. So just to give you a sense of the size of the branches that are in, this is probably the biggest one, and then I've got other ones this size. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to chuck this into the forest, and I'll be right back. Okay, now I'm going to put the liquid back into my pot. There we go. So I have this fully strained, and I've put the liquid back in the pot. So that's my dye pot. And I've got yarn. This is the yarn that I pre-mordanted last night. So what I did was I had another pot going, and I had water and alum 10%. So the alum was 10% of the weight of the dried yarn. And I put that in, let it simmer for about an hour, and took it out and hung it up. And rinsed it as well. So you want to rinse it just to get the excess alum off of it. And then when I'm ready to dye it, I put it back in the water. Because remember, when you put it in warm water, it opens up the fiber of the yarn. And so that's what I did. And so the temperature of the yarn is very similar to the temperature of the dye pot. So I'm going to put that in here now. And you can see how quickly the color already takes to the yarn. It's quite amazing. So we're going to let that sit I'll probably check on it in half an hour, maybe a little longer. We'll see how it goes. The next pot we have is the leaves. I love dyeing with lilac leaves, and I'll show you why in a minute. So we've got the leaves, and when I'm figuring out how much leaves I want to put in this, again, it's very similar to the bark. I put in, well, probably maybe a little bit more. So I put in probably 2/3 in this pot. You can see the steam still coming off of it. So the leaves are 2/3, and I put them in, and I can be a little aggressive in terms of temperature on these. And so I'll have it up to a boil, and then I'll turn it down and let it simmer for at least 2 hours. I let this sit overnight as well. And you want to look at the leaves. You can tell when you look at the leaves when they're really limp. You'll know that you've pretty much exhausted it, and it's ready for dyeing. So, turn the heat off, let it sit overnight, and I'm quite excited to see what's going to happen with this as well. I'll give you a sense of the color. See, the leaves are completely different from the bark, and you'd kind of expect that, right? So that's the color. I also did another thing. Remember I had mentioned that I was pre-mordanting the yarn, and so I used this pot last night. And so what I was doing was, before I put the leaves in, I had all of my yarn going, and I had alum in here and water. The alum was 10% of the weight of the dried yarn. Put that in, went through my skeins of yarn that I wanted to pre-mordant, and then kept the water, because water is very valuable and I don't like wasting it. So what I've used basically the water that I was using to mordant my yarn. I've left it, and I'm using that with the leaves. And so we'll see what impact that has on the color of the yarn. So now I'm going to strain this one. I'm going to use my mason jar again just to make it a little easier for me. And I'll probably have to use the gloves on this one, because this one temperature is it's a little bit warmer than the last one. Okay, we'll do one more. Okay. So you can see the leaves have definitely changed color as well. They almost look like an olive leaf now. But the color is definitely gone, and they're quite limp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, chuck that in the forest, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm going to pour this back into the pot. So one thing I'm a little worried about right now with this pot is that you can see that the steam's still coming off of it, and that temperature is definitely warmer than my yarn. So I've got a couple of options. One of them is I can bring the temperature down on this one, or increase the temperature in the yarn where it's sitting right now soaking up. So I'm going to do a little bit of both. I'm going to wait a little bit and till the temperature drops on this, and I'm also going to heat up basically the bin that's holding my wet yarn, and bring the temperature up just so that I'm not shocking it when I bring them together. So we'll let that sit for a bit, put the lid over here. And the last one I've already strained. I did that early this morning. And so what I did was, this was the flowers. And so with the flowers, I filled up the pot up to the top and pushed it down. I I wanted to cram as much into that as possible. So I did that, and then I added water, and I let that simmer. I didn't bring it to an aggressive boil. I just let it simmer, and then I turned it down and let it sit. And flour's a lot easier to tell if they're done or not, because you can see when you check on it every half hour, you can see that the color is coming out of the flower petals. And so that's what happens here as well. Not really petals, but part of when the lilac is no longer a vibrant purple, and it's starting to look more like a whitish gray. So that's what I did, and then I strained that this morning. So I've got that pot ready. So what I will do is I will add a skein of yarn into this pot. Okay, so I've got my wet yarn, which is very close in temperature to this pot. I'm gonna put this in now, and we'll see what happens. The temperature's gonna be at a very, very low temperature, and we'll let that sit. This one takes a little longer before it really takes color, but when it does take the color, it's fantastic. So I'm gonna let that sit. This has been cooling off, and I've increased the temperature in the bin that's holding my yarn. So I can add this now. I'm comfortable that it's not going to shock the yarn. Okay, we've got our skeins in now, and we'll just let them sit for a while. A couple things I want to tell you about the lilac is that it's not indigenous to North America, although we see it everywhere. At least you do in the areas that I live in. And part of it is, the reason we see them all over the place is because they can live to 100 years old. So they were originally brought over by the Europeans in the 1700s. And so I think North America fell in love with them, and there's so many different varieties all over the place. And there's from the same family as the olive and the jasmine, and the ash. So, fantastic history to them. They smell so great as well. And you can definitely do this inside or indoors if it's raining or not, because the smell of it is just so wonderful. And the leaves probably not as much as the flowers and the bark. So again, just to go over, I filled up half of this pot with bark, and the rest with water. This one was 2/3 of the leaves, and this one was I crammed it with the flowers, as many flowers as possible, and then filled it up with water. So we're gonna let that sit. I'm gonna go away and come back in half an hour, 45 minutes to check on it and see how we're doing. It's been about 45 minutes now, and I'm gonna check on it. I have been peeking in between. Okay, so this is the bark, and by the looks of the color, I think it's ready to come out. So what color do you think it's going to be? Okay, here we go. So it's got a nice brown color to it, and when the sun hits it, it's got a nice golden tone. It's really nice. It's kind of like tobacco a little bit, but I'm surprised at the bronze or the golden color that really starts to shine when the light hits it. So I've got that. That's the bark. The next one is, and so what I do is I've got a pot sitting here, or a bucket with water in it, and so the water is very similar to the temperature of the dye pots. And so what I'm going to do is I've got it in here, and then I'll rinse it. I'll let it sit in here, cool down, and then I'll wash it in the same temperature as the bucket. And then I'll hang it up, and it's ready to go. So I love this color because there's a lot of yellow in the stuff that you dye around here, but this is almost like a highlighter yellow. It's really nice. It's really interesting. So I'll put that in here, and then the last one, I have to say it's my favorite because I think the color is very unique, and you don't see this color too often. You don't see a green coming out that will last a while on the yarn. So this color is fantastic. And so how I got this color was I used the deepest purple I could find in the lilac. And I get a greenish color with white and with light purple, but I don't get an intense color like this. So that's why I love dyeing with the lilac flowers. You get this fantastic color. So I'm gonna put that in here. I'll wash that off and rinse it out, hang it up, and we'll be ready to go. I'll give you just a sense of what the colors look like side by side, because I did some dyeing earlier this week. So we had the bark, and so that's what the bark looked like. And then next we had the leaves, so that's what the leaves look like. And then at the very end we had the flowers, and that's what the flowers look like. So look at these colors from the lilac tree, from all different parts of the lilac tree. It's fantastic. So again, that's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite shrubs to dye with. Absolutely love it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions, just ask. Send me a note. You can either send it through Instagram or send it through YouTube, and I'm happy to answer it. Take care, everyone, and have a great week. Bye-bye.